Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling something that really messes with your head,
Yeah.
that feeling that the past, it isn't quite how you remember it.
Mm-hmm.
We are doing a deep dive into the Mandela Effect, often called ME.
Right, the Mandela Effect. And just to recap, for anyone new to it, it's basically when huge numbers of people share the exact same memory about something, an event, a brand name, a movie line that, well, turns out to be demonstrably false in our current reality.
It's fascinating stuff.
It really is. It's compelling, mainly because it shakes our trust in, shared reality itself, the stability of history even.
Okay, so let's unpack this a bit. We've looked at sources that offer, wildly different takes on what's going on.
Yeah, two main camps, really.
Is this whole thing just our minds playing tricks on us on a massive scale? Like collective false memories? Or is it something much stranger? Evidence that reality isn't fixed? Maybe memories leaking through from parallel timelines?
And that's the core tension we're exploring today. When you have thousands, maybe millions of unconnected people sharing the exact same incorrect detail. Well, what does that tell us?
Is it a bug in the human brain? Or is it maybe a feature of reality itself, showing us data from somewhere else?
Precisely. So we're going to explore both tracks.
Hmm.
We'll start with the more grounded psychological view first, and then we'll get into the, let's say, more out there multiversal ideas.
Okay, sounds good. Let's ground ourselves first then. Cognitive science, the standard explanation, the idea that the Mandela Effect is basically our minds editing things, misfiling them.
Yeah, editing, misfiling. The technical term often used is confabulation.
Confabulations.
It sounds complex, but it's something our brains do all the time, actually. Your brain doesn't like gaps or inconsistencies in your life story, your memories. So if information is missing or just a bit fuzzy...
It just fills in the blank with something plausible.
Exactly. It constructs a memory that fits the narrative. Now, with the Mandela Effect, the really weird part is seeing this usually individual process happen, somehow, collectively. Synchronized, almost.
And the classic example, the one that really blew this whole thing up online, and it's covered a lot in our sources.
Yeah.
It's the children's books, right?
Oh, yeah. The Berenstain Bears, spelled Berenstein. Thousands upon thousands of people swear they remember it spelled that way. With an E.
But it's not.
Nope. Every actual book, every official source confirms it's Berenstain Bears with an Aberenstein.
So how does psychology explain that specific widespread error?
Well, the argument is pretty strong, actually. It pulls on ideas like gist memory, remembering the general sense rather than details, and something called schema theory.
Schema theory.
Oh.
How does that apply here? Why would so many brains default to Stein instead of Stain?
Well, think about it. How many common names or words end in stain? Not that many. But Stein.
Oh, right. Like Einstein, Frankenstein.
Yeah.
It's a super common suffix, especially in certain contexts.
Exactly. It's a familiar pattern, a common Germanic or Yiddish surname ending. So the theory goes, our brain encounters this slightly unusual name, Berenstain, and it kind of autocorrects it. It assimilates it into the much more familiar Stein pattern.
That's called assimilation bias.
That's the one. The memory isn't necessarily broken from the start. It's just that the brain quickly slotted it into a pre-existing, more common category almost immediately. Overwrote the slightly odd detail.
Okay, that makes a certain kind of sense for a name. But, the Mandela Effect isn't just about names. Our sources point out other big examples that need slightly different explanations, don't they?
Absolutely. And that's where the psychological model gets, well, broader. Take C-3PO from Star Wars.
The golden droid.
Right. Except, ask people what color he is. Most say all gold. But if you actually watch the original movies closely, his right leg below the knee is silver.
No way. Is it really?
Yeah.
I don't remember that at all.
See? A lot of people don't. The psychological explanation here leans more towards confirmation bias and maybe visual assimilation. We expect him to be all gold, the gist is gold robot, so our brain tends to overlook or just smooth out that one inconsistent detail, the silver leg, and then pop culture reinforces the all gold image.
Huh. Okay. And what about the Monopoly man? The little guy with the top hat and mustache.
Rich Uncle Pennybags, yeah.
People swear he has a monocle, right? Like it feels iconic.
It does feel like he should, but he has never, ever been officially depicted with a monocle.
So what's the theory there?
That one's often put down to simple cultural suggestion or stereotype association. You see a wealthy, old-timey tycoon figure in a top hat and tails. Your brain just assumes, oh, he must have a monocle. It fits the trope, the schema for that kind of character.
So if you look at each case individually, psychology seems to have a plausible mechanism. Misremembering due to patterns, visual smoothing, cultural assumptions.
Exactly, and proponents argue that the collective nature comes from shared initial misinterpretations, perhaps, amplified massively by conversation, and especially the internet, like a feedback loop of false memory.
But this is where the other side pushes back, right?
Yeah.
Even if those mechanisms exist, why is the specific error so incredibly consistent across millions of people who've never interacted? Like with Berensteinstein, why that specific spelling change remembered identically by so many? If it's just random brain filling, wouldn't there be more variation in the false memories?
And that is the sticking point. The sources call this the breadcrumb. Even if you accept the psychological reasons, the sheer uniformity of the specific glitch Berenstein with an E, a non-existent monocle, a forgotten silver, like, it starts to feel less like random individual error.
And more like something else, a shared imprint.
Yeah, perhaps. A shared pattern deviation from the record. And it's that shared pattern, that specific uniformity, that really opens the door to the much more radical alternative theory.
Okay, let's go there then. Let's pivot away from the brain being faulty and into the idea that, well, reality itself might be shifting.
Yeah.
That we're somehow hopping between parallel worlds.
Right. This view flips the script entirely. The memory isn't the problem. The memory might actually be accurate, just accurate to a reality we're not quite in anymore.
The sources use this really interesting analogy. They talk about reality being like a sandbox, almost like a simulation.
Sort of, yeah. A quantum sandbox where the underlying code can sometimes get updated. And maybe, just maybe, a few humans notice the patch. They notice the change because they remember the previous version of the code.
Wow. Okay, so if reality can shift, what's supposedly happening when we notice one of these Mandela effects? How does that work?
Well, according to this model, reality isn't one single fixed thing. It's more like a vast ocean of possibilities, an almost infinite number of parallel timelines, all slightly different. And sometimes, for reasons theories debate, maybe big collective consciousness shifts, maybe even individual choices, though that's more fringe, the timeline we are currently experiencing kind of blinks, or merges slightly with a very similar adjacent timeline.
And our memories, they don't always update with a blink.
That's the idea. The way the sources phrase it is quite evocative. Memory acts like a multiversal compass.
A multiversal compass. What does that mean, practically?
Well, think of a regular compass that always points north, right? Regardless of where you physically are. This theory suggests our deepest, most resonant memories might not be strictly tied only to this current timeline we're standing in.
So they can hold data, echoes, from the reality we were just in, before the blink.
Precisely. Those memories that seem wrong in this reality, like remembering Berenstein with an E or the Monopoly Man's monocle, they aren't seen as errors in recalling this history.
They're accurate recollections of a different previous history.
Yes, they're termed quantum residue. Little fragments, echoes, bits of data left over from these overlapping or shifting timelines. It's like another version of reality whispering, hey, I existed too.
So from this perspective, noticing the Mandela effect isn't a sign your memory is failing.
Quite the opposite. It's potentially a sign of heightened awareness, an ability to sense the subtle shifts, the seams in the fabric of the universe. It's almost presented as experiential proof that these parallel realities are real and we're moving between them.
Okay, but the implications there are huge. If reality can just shift under us, what does that mean for, like, free will? Are we just passengers bouncing around timelines without any control?
And that brings us to the so what question. And this is where the multiversal view offers something surprisingly empowering. It actually argues against the idea of us being broken or passive.
How so?
The sources argue that the Mandela effect, seen this way, doesn't prove we're flawed. It proves that reality listens.
Reality listens. Okay, I like the sound of that.
Yeah.
But listens to what? How does my inner state connect to these outer shifts?
Well, if you accept the premise that timelines are fluid and numerous, the really powerful takeaway is that you are never truly trapped in one version of yourself or one version of reality.
Because other versions already exist.
Exactly. The very fact that you can sense a different past implies that different futures are also accessible. The desired reality isn't something you have to build from scratch. It's potentially an adjacent timeline you can shift into.
Okay, so how? Do the sources suggest a mechanism for actually choosing a timeline. It sounds like science fiction.
It does lean that way, concept-wise. The mechanism proposed isn't about physical travel, obviously. It's about internal states. Vibration, frequency, focus, these are the terms used.
Right.
The idea is that to consciously or even unconsciously blink into a parallel where your reality already matches that vibration, you need to first shift a thought, a choice, a frequency. You align your internal energy, your dominant thoughts and feelings, with the reality you wish to experience.
So noticing the Mandela effect is like proof that shifting is possible, and that maybe we're doing it all the time without realizing it.
Kind of, yeah. It demonstrates that your awareness, your consciousness is playing a role. It's noticing the discrepancy, which implies consciousness isn't just passively recording this timeline, but might be interacting with the multiverse. Your internal state becomes the key driver, the tuning fork, for the timeline you inhabit.
So it reframes the whole thing. Instead of, oh no, my memory's broken, it's more like, okay, reality is flexible and my focus matters. The fluidity isn't a problem. It's an opportunity.
That's the empowering spin, definitely. If truth, or at least experienced reality, is fluid, then the version of reality that becomes most solid or persistent for you is the one you are most consistently aligning with internally. The glitch is just feedback.
Okay, wow. Let's try and quickly sum this up. We've looked at two very different ways to understand the Mandela effect.
Yeah, the psychological view first. Collective confabulation, basically. Our brains filling gaps using familiar patterns, schemas, biases, explaining things like the Berenstain Bears spelling or C-3PO's leg.
Right, seeing it as a quirk of how memory and perception work, amplified by social sharing.
And then we explored the far more radical alternative, the multiversal view.
Where these aren't memory errors at all, but quantum residue. Real fragments of slightly different parallel timelines that we've shifted from or are overlapping with.
And memory acts like a multiversal compass, holding echoes of those other realities.
So what does this all mean for you listening right now? Whether you lean towards the cognitive science explanation or the quantum possibility, the core takeaway seems to be that noticing these glitches doesn't have to be scary.
It can actually be reframed. Instead of a source of doubt, am I losing my mind? It can become a sign of being particularly aware, maybe even sensitive to the nuances of reality and memory.
There's this final image from the sources that's quite powerful. It suggests that every time you notice a glitch, one of these Mandela effects,
Yeah.
instead of freaking out,
You should maybe just take a breath, smile, and almost whisper to the universe or yourself, "Thank you for showing me I'm awake."
acknowledging that you're perceiving something subtle, something on the edge of awareness, recognizing your own sensitivity.
Yeah, exactly. It turns panic into presence.
And that really launched into a final sort of provocative thought for you to mull over based on that multiversal idea of shifting realities.
Right. If the theory holds that you shift timelines by shifting your internal frequency, your thoughts, feelings, choices, then maybe the next time you notice a glitch out there, ask yourself,
How closely do my current choices, my current internal state, my thoughts, my focus, how closely do they align with the reality I actually want to be experiencing?
is the glitch really in the external reality? Or is the main glitch sometimes the gap between our internal state and the parallel reality we truly desire? Because, as the source material suggests at the end, the code only shifts when you do.